All right, friends and listeners, today's episode is a really special one. I've said that before, but I really, truly, not marketing language, really mean this one because this is, well, I meant them in all of them, but this one really is unique in that it is a founder having a conversation with a church pastor. Today's episode is with the pastor of the church that my wife and I attend here in San Francisco called Reality SF. And before you think it's this kind of new agey, and maybe it is a little new agey, kind of church with a rock band and a kind of a cliche of the traditional church that we're all aware of, I've got to say, Dave Lomas, the pastor and the founder of Reality SF, is a founder like so many other founders I've had on this podcast, except what he started was a church here in the heart of San Francisco, a city not necessarily known for its reception for conventional Christianity. Dave and his church knows their customer. It's a 20 to 30 something skeptical, typically secular individual that has moved to, many of which have moved to San Francisco for a job or for financial engineering of some kind, and are of the cerebral, intellectual sort. And Dave speaks to that audience really well. He truly knows his audience, and he speaks to it quite well. You can listen to any of his lectures and sermons online on their own podcast. It's a very, very technology forward operation that they're running over there. And speaking of knowing a customer, yeah, they've got their sermons are in podcast form for people that can't make the service, and now they have audience members around the world listening to his sermons because they are so dang good. They are truly mind-blowing, and it's a really nice grounding wire for me as a creator each week to go and listen to someone talk about something that has nothing to do with entrepreneurship, but has everything to do with being useful in one's community. And I really enjoy attending Reality, but I love this conversation more than any other interaction I've had with Dave. It's the most honest interaction I've had with him, and by far the most honest interaction I've ever had with a pastor. Probably the most honest reflection and interaction from a pastor that I've ever heard. So I cannot overstate the gratitude I have for how open he is with what it's like to be a pastor. I think you're going to really enjoy this episode. This episode is brought to you by Playcast Media. Go to playcastmedia.com to get the easiest way. If you want the easiest way to get a in-home or in-office premium professional podcast, go to playcastmedia.com. It's what I use. It is the easiest way. One click, boom, it's all delivered to your door. Everything you need for an amazing, premium, polished, professional podcast. It's the premium podcast in a box. Go to playcastmedia.com. It's playcastmedia.com and enter the code name James, and you will get 10% off. This episode is also sponsored by Dope Dog. I don't know how Dave would feel about this, but you can give your dog CBD treats if you feel like they need a little something to relax. My dachshund Wendell, he yaps quite a bit. And got to be honest, ever since we discovered Dope Dog about 3 months ago, it has been a different scene in our household. They make CBD treats for dogs, and dogs love them because they taste amazing and make them feel better, whether it's joint pain, whether it's anxiety. It is something you should consider. I kind of laugh, but it is truly a game changer for us. Using human-grade ingredients and high-quality CBD, Dope Dog makes everything from treats, oils, even CBD shampoo. If your dog is ready to be dope, go to Dope Dog. And you can use below the line as the promo code to get 20% off of anything at www.dope.com. dope.dog. That's www.dope.dog, and see for yourself what all the hype is about. All right, without further ado, let's get into it with Dave Lomas. This is Below the Line. Dave, cheers.
Cheers.
We've got some, what are we drinking here?
By
Coconut water?
Molokai coconut, I think, or something.
Ooh, that is good.
I told you.
Oh, wow.
I'm 100% addicted to this stuff.
Wow. That is seriously good. And we have for listeners, we have a weird drink every episode. And this one is provided by Dave, who we'll touch on in a little bit. He's a purveyor of amazing things in many different categories. I imagine you spend a lot of time sifting and finding and seeking really amazing things, including a drink each day. You drink this every day?
I drink one. I limit myself to one a day. It's hard.
When did you discover this? And I'm not joking. I'm kind of ear to ear smiling because it is so good.
It's delicious. I think that's the thing. Like I want, sometimes I'll search out, like, I want this thing, whatever it is, the drink I want to drink. In the morning I have coffee. I can't drink coffee all day. As you know, as a fellow founder, you start usually something you're founding with all the caffeine and all the coffee and all the things that keep you going. And it just destroys you internally. And I just did me. So I can have one cup in the morning after 2 trips to the ER, when we first started the church. And so
what do you mean 2 trips to the ER?
Well, the church, the first 3 years of the church, it was full on like coffee all day, meetings all day, eating really bad food, just going through, ending the day with going out for a drink with someone from the church or whatever. And just that over and over and over again. I think the first, few years gained a ton of weight and just my insides were destroyed. And then thought I was having a heart attack twice, went to the ER and they're like, no, it's acid reflux and stress or something. And took me off everything, like caffeine and spicy food and fatty foods and everything I loved, which was, they said, I'm like, what do I eat?
Where did the stress come from? What were the things explicitly that were stressing you out?
Oh, I think it was just the starting. We started a church in San Francisco that when we started, it kind of took off, grew really fast, faster than we thought, way faster than we thought. And then the demands of keeping that going, and meeting new people and trying to, there was a ton of momentum at first. And I think one of the greatest fears that I've had is I grew up in Bakersfield, California, where it's kind of rural sprawl, where a Walmart or Target will open up and then all this really cool stuff happens around that mega store, all these stores, and then that anchor tenant will leave, and then everything turns into these secondhand, rundown stores that that are not. And I've always had this internal
turns into
fear.
A Kohl's.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Remember Mervyn's before Kohl's?
I do.
Okay,
yeah. That's
so
better to have a Kohl's than a Mervyn's.
Yeah, it's true. So I was, I always feared there would be this momentum in our church, and then we would never root, and it would just turn into something I never wanted it to be. So I was first excited about the growth of our church, and San Francisco is a pretty difficult place to start up a religious movement,
Right.
spiritual movement, even though San Francisco is very spiritual. But I mean, we're a non-denominational church planted right in the Castro Mission districts of San Francisco. That's not easy. And so when it was growing really fast, the idea, our hope was that, a lot of it's hope and fear. My hope was that we'd be here for the long term. My fear was we'd be this flash in the pan, sort of thing that just happened that was really cool that happened from 2010 to 2015, then we disappeared, you know? So I had all the stress to like root us, establish us as a church that would go the distance in our generation, you know? So that brought on tons of stress that turned into like, you know, trying to keep up the pace, that turned into internalized stress, that turned into a really bad kind of stomach ailments and all this stuff that sent me to the ER twice. Yeah. And then after that, like had to change my diet, to change the way my rhythms, my lifestyle, which brings us back to buy. So I get 1 cup of coffee in the morning, and I wanted to find that good drink I can have that wouldn't like activate like pain in my stomach or acid reflux or whatever. And I like coconut water, but it just doesn't do it for me all the time. Then I found this stuff that's like a coconut drink and it has a little bit of green tea, caffeine. It's so good.
Oh, it does have green tea in it.
A little bit of green tea.
Oh, wow.
Not much, just a little bit.
Man, this sounds like
This is your new drink. This is your new drink.
Seriously, because I was showing you the drink that I have every afternoon. It's green tea as well.
I hope I get a case of it sent by Buy. Hope they just listen to this and they send me a case.
Well, since I started doing these weird like drinks, that has started to happen, which is I kind of wanted to manifest that where companies would send me weird drinks, and that started to happen, which is cool. So, but this one is not, and I try to proactively select them. I'm not just going to be a shill that will do whatever for free drinks. But this one you selected, and it couldn't be more fitting because one, it fits the weird drink category perfectly, but I also knew there was going to be a lot of reasoning behind it because very intentional with the things that you choose, and it is literally for listeners. It is for the chairs you sit in, desk. We were chatting about before we hit record, just the designs. Actually, we weren't chatting about this before we hit record, but the design and intention behind everything that your church does, that Reality does, it's so well thought out. Like music, the lighting, and my wife and I, we've attended for the last 7 years, and really excited for this episode because it's a different type of. It's a founder of a different ilk, but a founder nonetheless. And to hammer that point home, so it's so interesting about Buy, but and your choice because it is so dang good. But I will also say to the route that you got there, 2 trips to the ER, being very intentional in what you're eating and drinking every day. I don't know if I've told you, but I think I have. I also went to the ER.
Yeah, I remember that.
For about 1.5 years and 2 years in to building my company. Way too many coffees, 5, 6, 7 coffees a day.
Gosh.
And contributed heavily to a heart condition. It's hard to know what the exact cause was, but they know caffeine and stress are 2 of the biggest contributing factors. And had to go to the ER and have a cardioversion where they just basically shock your heart back into rhythm.
My gosh.
Like 2 weeks before getting married. And it was, that was a wake-up call too. I probably still consumed 6 or 7 coffees for like 6 months.
After that.
Yeah, because I couldn't imagine. I leaned on it so much to get through the day. And until it was probably 30, 40, 50 people around that time frame. So it was just, I leaned on this external ingredient of caffeine so much, thought that I needed it, that I just couldn't stop, even though it had sent me to the ER. Luckily, over many years, weaned off it. But that is very, very similar stories and very similar mentality of, wow, we're so lucky to have this momentum. I don't want to ruin this opportunity, which creates so much scarcity in your head of like, I know how rare this is. I don't want to ruin it. And that attachment to maximizing that opportunity for me was that attachment was so unhealthy.
Yeah, totally. You get attached to things like caffeine or whatever drug it is to like keep the thing that's working really well in your life going. And that's the dark side. The shadow side of it is it's also killing you at the same time.
Mm.
And it can be the very thing that is your downfall. I mean, that's life though. I mean, that's literally most of like the thing that we have to mature past as people, humans, leaders, is like the thing that you're really good at probably has this shadow side that left unchecked will destroy you, you know? And then usually what happens with time and circumstance, life has a way of, and I believe God has a way of conspiring with your life to show you, if you're fortunate, to show you your shadow side in a way you can grow from it.
That's a good way of articulating.
Yeah.
That growth is making you come face to face with your shadow side.
Yeah. Yeah. If you're lucky, a lot of people are lucky enough for that to happen to them, fortunate enough for that to happen to them without them being completely destroyed and losing everything.
Well, you're the second podcast guest that has mentioned shadow side. Where does that terminology come from?
Oh man. That's a good question. I don't know the where that has come from. I've read it through a lot of spiritual writers. I think it's like your weakness, the part of your life that's left unchecked, the part of your life that that is like the dark side of like. So if you're a creator and you know you're really good at creating, you're kind of like the dark underbelly to that could be the way you treat people, and the dark underbelly could be like you can like see people as a means to your end,
right?
And that's
see other
like,
people in relationships as you see your stylus or your paintbrush.
And a lot of creators just like, that's just who I am, and I just the thing I'm creating is way bigger than any person. And if they're fortunate enough, they can be shown their shadow side. So oftentimes through failure, and then grow from it, and then still be able to create, but to care for people or to deal with that dark side. Yeah. So dark side, underbelly, shadow side. I think I've learned that. I'm sure other people have said it in all kinds of different worlds, but the world I'm coming from are like spiritual writers that have written about your shadow side. Yeah.
Yeah, it is the thought that comes to mind is this book that I mentioned on the podcast a bunch. What got you here won't get you there, and tying in that shadow side to the actual anecdotes of both of us unsustainably taking paths towards our own paths of creation. It is that this concept in this book, what got you here won't get you there, just articulates in so many ways in life, what got you to this place is the very thing that will keep you from getting to the next place, or to graduate beyond it, or set in your parlance of just your what has helped you create could actually destroy you along the way.
When the way that the analogy that I have, or the mental picture that I have of that is like rocket boosters that get you to outer space. Like they launch you from Earth to outer space, but then they fall to the Earth and they can't take you to where you're going next, you know?
Yeah.
So that's usually the mental picture that I come up with, the whole, what got you here won't get you there. So there's things in my life that have gotten me to, mid 30s, to being a founding pastor of a church. And a lot of it was rooted in the way I grew up and the way I had to survive and kind of use my own experience and see the world in a certain way. And it got me to where I was. And it's not the way that I'm going to get into my 40s and 50s. And so I had to let those fall to the earth. Like the rocket boosters got me here, and I just like let them go now. You know, you have to say goodbye to them. You have to like mourn them and like, thank you for getting me. Yeah, Marie Kondo, that stuff, like, thank you, and let them go. That sort of thing.
Yeah, totally. There's so many areas that we can talk about that I'm so excited to chat about. But you mentioned your life and kind of your that arc and getting to your mid-30s and starting a church. Tell me 3 stories that have helped shape who you have become today, here in San Francisco, sunny day in San Francisco,
Yeah.
in
It's
July. Yeah. Tell me 3 stories that have helped shape Dave.
Yeah. So there, these, if I was to say 3 stories that helped shape who I am, they're fairly heavy stories. They're not like a light story. I think most of them
below
are
the line. Below the line.
So the first story would be my story of just parents growing up. I thought in my early 30s that I grew up in a home that was full of love and support. And in many ways, I think that was true. But then in my 20s and my 30s, my sisters would always bring up stories of us as kids. And I'm like, I don't remember that. Like, I don't remember stories from being all the stories they would bring up.
And where were you in the line of kids?
I'm the oldest. So it's not like I'm the youngest. I don't remember that. I was too young. I was the oldest. And my sisters were like, why don't you remember anything from our childhood? So come to find out in my like my mid 30s through therapy and spiritual director and stuff like that, I kind of realized that I suppressed most of my childhood because it was so traumatic. And I think the way that this story, with my mom and my dad both suffering from their own forms of addiction and abuse and cycles like this, and I think the way it shaped my story was that I have a way of like compartmentalizing pain, or I had a way of compartmentalizing pain and seeing intuiting like the upside to everything. Like I'd go into a place and I would be able to like lead through intuition and see, like show the beauty and the bright side of things. But it came out of all this pain. I think Malcolm Gladwell's book, David and Goliath, helped me see a lot of like, you grow up with these things that seem like they're keeping you from being who you're supposed to be. You see them as being like roadblocks, but they're actually not. They're actually the reason why you are who you are. So growing up with parents that were, my home life being so erratic and unstable, it helped me see the world.
What would be an example of erratic, unstable?
Yeah, my dad, pretty heavy alcoholic. My mom, kind of growing up, shielded us and me and my sisters from a lot of abuse from my dad, who at this point has completely apologized for, has owned all that stuff, but it's pretty, and still a lot of it is suppressed that I hear secondhand through my mom and my sisters. And then my mom, like having so much trauma growing up to where she raised us like as someone who had I think at that point, a 6th grade education, and immigrated here from Mexico when she was really young, dropped out of school really young, got married really young, had me really young. And so all of that, like my childhood, I just didn't feel like I was like set up to succeed. But I think my mom was able to hold stability and love and protection enough to give me a really good fighting chance to do something well with my life. And then once I graduated high school, she got addicted to drugs and like was gone from the family for like 7 years or something.
Wow.
So
did you know at the time, or were you able to in some way observe that she was shielding, that she was absorbing a lot of this?
No, I was a kid. No, none. She told me, like 5 years ago, she was like, I was asking her questions like, what happened growing up? She's like, you don't remember? I'm like, I honestly do not remember. It's so deeply buried and I need help like accessing it. So she would say, yeah, I mean, my dad would get drunk and start throwing things, and I would hide you kids or send you to the neighbor's house, or I'm like, what? I don't remember any of that stuff.
Wow.
So, and then my mom at that point, once we grew up a bit, I was in high school. I graduated high school. I think she was just like kind of over that cycle. And then she said, gave herself to drugs because it made her feel strong. And then it destroyed her. And then she went through a rehab program.
What do you mean by made her feel strong?
She was addicted to meth for a while. And if you know anything about meth, it just makes you feel superhuman when you're on meth. So, and it was so strange. I mean, thinking back, my mom started using drugs when I was in high school. That was when I started using drugs. And we were using drugs at the same time in different rooms. Me and my friends up all night in my bedroom, her up all night, like in the garage.
Wow.
Not even knowing why my mom was up in the garage, not even putting two and two together. So like the story that has shaped me is like this like growing up family of origin sort of story that's really harsh, but in some ways, the way that I kind of coped and survived turned me into the kind of person that helped me read a room really well. I think having a dad who, is he drunk, not drunk? Is it?
Right.
I can read people. I can read
high
rooms.
stakes to not read the room.
Yeah,
right. If
exactly.
your dad is in that state. Yeah.
Read the room, know how to like somehow figured out how to like manage the chaos of my family, like manage different people, like, no, that we're doing this, we're doing that. This is what I think I just learned that from a young age. We talked about the Enneagram before we got on. I'm Enneagram 7, which I think, people don't know nature, nurture. How does Enneagram show up in someone's life? Personality test.
And for listeners, you can check out the Diana Chapman episode where she chats about what an Enneagram is, but it's a type of personality test that kind of, instead of a personality of this is who you are at your best, it's kind of like these are the outward signs of what is kind of dark inside of you.
Yeah, so that you can overcome it.
Right.
And to become a redeemed version of yourself. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Kind of looks at the 7 deadly sins plus 2, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Enneagram 7, enthusiast, gluttony, like I want it all right now. I see. So I think nature, nurture, I think a lot of my personality comes from the nurture side. I know some nature plays into it, but I see a lot of nurture side, like the need to avoid pain is like the slogan for the 7, right? Which is, I can see like growing up, that was my life. I needed to avoid pain. What did I do? I suppressed pain. Drugs in high school were my favorite things in the world to do. Like my favorite things in the world to do because it would
what
suppress
drugs?
pain. I did pretty much everything outside of heroin when I was in high school. Yeah.
Wow.
I don't like needles, so didn't get into that. But pretty much everything outside of heroin.
Yeah.
And I mean, I can say, it's so weird to say I loved it, but I did. I loved any Enneagram, like 7 would know, like one of my favorite things to do is to go get surgery. So they put me under, like that moment right before I go under. I love it so much. It's so weird. I don't know. Like
That's,
just
no, well, it's
like, that feeling of I'm gone.
Well, talking about the shadow, terminology and integrating one shadow, like you have to recognize it's there.
Yeah.
That shadow side of and the one thought that comes to mind is what got you here won't get you there. And I like that's a great visualization of the rocket boosters. The other thought is just this thematic thought of our strengths are our weaknesses.
Mm-hmm.
And they aren't separate buckets of like, you're punctual, but your weakness is you're not creative. It's actually, they really are so tied together. Yeah. And your strengths are, in so many ways, weaknesses. And so your avoidance of I think to integrate one shadow requires you to really acknowledge
your pain
in full 360 degrees. So just the pain and just the fact, that observation of you loved
I did
drugs.
And that was like
which is so cliche of every pastor I chat with. It's like this story kind of everybody's heard this.
No,
I'm joking. This is wow. Okay, so keep going.
So so I think that that story really shaped me, and I've reconciled that story over the last probably 5 to 8 years. And I'm still in the middle of it too with my folks, and trying to live in the healthy relationship with them. And still, there's tons of love there. That's the thing. If I was to describe my childhood, it'd be love. There's a lot of love, but it was like it didn't come without pain, a lot of pain. And the pain is what I like ran from. And I embrace love. I mean, I'm a very loving person. My parents still very affectionate towards me, and me to them. But so that shaped me a lot. I think that shaped my personality. That shaped my like both intuition and this like the way I'm an enthusiast. And I love to start things. I think there's an old Mad Men quote that I remember that stuck with me watching that series. I think it was when Don Draper, the main character, was like seeing that new girl that he was not his wife when they got divorced. And then he's talking to his wife. I'm totally forgetting her name in the movie now.
January Jones or
January, her character. And January says to Don Draper, whatever his real name is, John Hamm's character, she says, does this new girl know that you like the beginning of things?
Mm.
And I remember watching that going, oh my gosh, that's like such a great description of like my personality type. I love the beginning of things. I love starting new things, but like 4 years into it, I don't like them as much, and I get bored with them. So this leads into the second like story that shaped my life, is my marriage. I've been married for 17 years, 16 or 17. I don't know math. So somewhere around 2002 is when I got married. Mm-hmm. And Ashley and I have been together since 1996, dating. So we've been together for most of our lives. The story around this that has shaped who I am is Ash, my wife, had struggled with an eating disorder right after we got married. And it was kind of managed somewhat well when we lived in Bakersfield, and then when we moved to Santa Barbara, and then when we moved to San Francisco, the pressure of, starting a church and the pressure of everything that we went through exposed this disorder that she struggled with for a lot of her life. And it became to where to put it the way I would say it is, it tested my vows. Like I honestly came to the point where I'm like, I don't know if we can be married anymore. This is destroying me. We're not relating. I don't even know who you are.
When was this?
This was 2016, 15, like 14, 15, 16, around there, where it got really, really, really bad. And
so this is 14 years into marriage, and how many years together?
7 years plus.
Wow,
so
20 plus years together. Yeah.
And here's the strange thing about being a pastor is that your whole life is wrapped up. Everything is interconnected, right? So if my marriage was going to end, so was my job. It's not like I was a banker. I'm like, my marriage ended, I can still do my job as a banker.
How come? Why would it mean the end of your job?
Well, being a pastor, like if your marriage falls apart, I mean, it's it's hard to come back from that, because people are like, if you can't stay married to your spouse and hold your family together, can you pastor a church?
Right. If you can't see that vow through, then is there another shoe that's going to drop with your commitment to the church?
Yeah. So it was like I felt stuck. Like I can't to be completely honest, this is the honesty podcast, right?
Yeah. And I'm appreciating every ounce of it so far.
Yeah. So it was like, it felt like every ounce of me that didn't want to keep going forward. It felt, it was really, really hard. We're both in therapy. We're both very open about just these struggles that she's had and this disorder. And I felt like at a certain point, like, I think I can't move forward. But then I'm like, if I leave, then I leave it all. And I got to the point where I was honestly ready to leave it all. Like, okay, I'm leaving the marriage, the job, all of it. Like, because this eating disorder is just destroying my wife and me and everything. I just can't stand by. I just can't do this anymore. And so it was that kind of discussion. Then she had one of her closest friends, her and I were like, there has to be an intervention of some sort, meaning two people that she loves and respects say the same thing in the same time, not together. We weren't together when we did it. I said it, she said it. And that was the moment Ash woke up. Like, her friend said, Dave is going to leave you. And I think by him staying, he's enabling you, because you think he'll never leave you. You can do anything you want, because you know that, he can't leave. He's completely, this is like your marriage is like the foundation of his career. He knows that. So, but and her friend said, I've counseled him. I've told him you really need to, like, tell her that you're going to leave if she doesn't go to a program. And then that was what really woke her up. And then I said the same thing, like, Ash, you have to go to a program. And all of that was interlaced, like love. I deeply loved her, and I didn't even know who she was anymore. The eating disorders, like any addiction, they ravage a person, they take over a person, and then they eat them alive from the inside out, which is an ironic way of talking about eating disorder. It eats you alive. It literally does. And
how so? Do you mind?
Well, it
helping me walk through.
Well, if an eating disorder takes, like, whatever it does to the body, it does to the soul. Like, like Ash was emaciated, like not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. The soul was gone. Like, her soul was gone. And it was sad. It was really sad.
When you look back on that, and that articulation of potentially enabling it, if you feel like that was a contributing factor, what would you have told yourself? Like, what were the ways that you were enabling that now you look back and say, man, I could have changed that behavior or could have done it differently?
Yeah, I enabled it through codependency. And I think this falls into, I was coming awake to my codependency at the same time I was coming awake to my family of origin. They were really connected, because my codependency was like, I'd go in and like, Cash, I want to help you make the structure of changing everything. And then I would, like, the next day go, I love you. It's okay. You can do what you want. Like, it's just like, I came to the point where I knew I needed her to be sick in a sick way. It's just codependent, like completely codependent.
Wow.
And,
what benefit to you, just to outline it, what benefit was it to you for her to
keeping her happy?
Be sick?
Keeping her happy. Like, you're sick, and you staying sick seems to somehow make you happy, even though you're not happy. But I don't want to be the one that removes this thing from you. The way that when she went through recovery, they call it in recovery, eating disorder is like an abusive relationship that you keep going back to. And she had that with this eating disorder. And I almost didn't want to take that from her in a weird way, looking back.
It's really, again, thank you so much for sharing this. This is why the podcast exists, because I think there are people out there that will go through something like this and just be so thankful that someone is articulating this experience. Do you think your first story of pain avoidance was a big factor in 20 plus years? And maybe it was only in part of that time that Ashley may have had this eating disorder, but you just wanted to avoid it and just in the short term, let's just be happy and get through it, not knowing in the long term, like the coffee consumption,
totally,
it's destroying from the inside out.
Yeah, this was the life script that I lived out of, like pain avoided. So a lot of it was codependence. For Ash to go through any sort of real recovery would cause us too much pain in our marriage. People would know about it from the church. How would the church respond to us? That sort of thing. All of it, you know?
Can I just say, I feel like Ash is like the rock that the church is built on. Like, I feel like
she's amazing.
Yes. I think it's just, if it hasn't happened yet, maybe it's one of the Sundays I've missed, but I feel like it's just it's an inevitable moment that she's going to come out on stage. I mean, just outpouring of love.
Yeah.
Because
she is an incredible, and that's the thing, like, that's what was the hardest part. Like, she's so incredible that this was eating her life where she wasn't showing up to her own life. Mm-hmm. And this wasn't stretched out over, this was like, it got really serious for about 3 years, a 3-year stretch where it was like horrific. We went through marriage counseling together and we were trying to make it work. And then we just we knew that what we had to deal with was this disorder. So this story ends with her finally going to 2 different programs, starting her program off by saying, what are your goals? Why are you here? And she said, I want to have a child. So one of the reason why we couldn't have children is because of her eating disorder, she had lost her menstrual cycle and couldn't ovulate. She didn't ovulate for 15 years or something like that. So, that happened, and that was what she went to her program for. And it took I think a 9-month program. She graduated, and I got my wife back. It was incredible. One of the things that this is how I counteract, I don't know if that's the right word. I buffer myself from my proclivities. So if I have a proclivity, like I like new things, I'm an enthusiast. What's the next thing? All this stuff. The way I try to buffer it is like, I believe in commitments, and to have to face Ash and say, if we don't get help, and if you don't get help, I don't know if I can keep this commitment to you. I mean, I've been with her for 20 something years. I mean, for someone who loves new things, like, she's the only woman like I'll ever love. And to say that, like, this is really hard, and I don't know if I can keep my commitment here, was like the bottom, like for me, bottoming out. But it was the commitment that caused me. It's like the vow I made to her caused me to go. And if we get help, if you get help, if I get help, we can move forward. But just the last thing I want to do is to leave this commitment. I really believe that commitments make us into the people that we're just supposed to become. It's commitments. It's not endless options. For me, it's like committing. So
it's like the banks of a river.
Yeah.
Creating a river rather than just a spill field of water
that's right,
drenches the ground.
So it was our commitment to each other and her commitment to me that brought her into this program finally. And then graduated, restored her weight. And then it took about another 1.5 years where all of a sudden one day she, out of the blue, she ovulated. And we didn't even know it until she did some blood tests or something. And one level was off the charts. And she called her doctor, why is this level so high? He goes, oh, you ovulated. She's like, wait, what? I ovulated. I didn't do anything to ovulate. And he goes, I don't know. That's what the numbers say. He goes, you guys should try to get pregnant. And this was the first time this has ever happened. Naturally we could try to get pregnant.
And this was her intention from that the first day
On
of
the first day of
the program, but it wasn't like tracked each week or something
No.
like that. It was just
No, it was at the when she graduated, it was. But then after like a year, like we just, or even less than that, you just kind of didn't track it as much anymore. And then they said, you can try now to get pregnant. And so we did that next month and we got pregnant. And our baby girl, Juniper, is 5 months old. And she's like the most amazing thing in the world. Ash and I are living literally like a life where we're like, we wake up, we're going, why do we get to live this life? This life is so insanely good. How do we get to live this life? You know, that sort of thing. But it came out of the thing that shaped me from this story was like facing her. Both of us always having to do the work of facing our shadow side, the thing that like she loves healthy eating. She loves working out. She loves, and also it's the shadow side that can lead into body image stuff and eating disorder stuff and trigger stuff and all that thing. And the temper of the shadow side always, for both of us.
Totally. It's friends of mine ask me why I'm so productive or why I think I'm, why I'm able to, I guess, be somewhat creative in different realms. And I think there are two answers there, above the line and the below the line. The below the line answer is, I think my own childhood had a fear of abandonment that I chat about a little bit with another podcast guest, but as the youngest of five, like I think the outward appearance, and this is the mistake we all make as humans, is we look at the leaves instead of the roots, and the leaves are like, okay, angel investing and podcasting and startups and founder, but really the roots are the youngest of five and I share a pretty erratic childhood, so much love, but a similarly erratic childhood. And the youngest of five, I think it was just wired in my brain that I can only hang out if I'm valuable to the group. And parents can be in their best selves very unconditional, but your 6-year-old sibling is not going to give you unconditional love. It's going to be very conditional. 8-year-old sibling, 12-year-old sibling, 14-year-old sibling. So that shadow is where so much of this comes from, to where eating right, exercising, those things can seem really, really healthy, but that's the leaves instead of the roots for many of us.
Yeah. Keeping that, I think a lot of it comes from also like self-awareness, spending the time to be self-aware, what's going on. You say below the line, under the surface, like what's going on under the surface or below the line of your life. What are you operating out of? What's this coming from? I do that whenever like there's anger there that I can't deal with, or there's overwhelming ecstasy somewhere. Like I'm always like, where's that coming from? Where's that? And is there any part of it that needs to be checked or tempered or whatever? Doing that work daily through, there's spiritual practices like the daily examine, the prayer of examine. That's really helpful.
What is that?
Prayer of examine is it is an Ignatian practice that I think it's an Ignatian practice that is that allows you to daily examine your heart and invite God into a conscious awareness of every moment of the day. So ending the day with like a prayer of illumination, inviting God to like show you where you're at today and where he was at today. And if there's any ways that we're like incongruent with the life that we're to live in God. And then to just acknowledge the incongruency, and then to invite God to forgive us, and then to fill us with his spirit so that we can live fully kind of present to him and to his world the next day, that sort of thing. And allows you to go, where's that anger? And the whole point isn't this practice isn't to check a box. It's to hopefully one day you don't need the practice where you're doing it every moment.
Mm-hmm.
Something comes up and you're moving to like, where's this coming from? Where's God in this? Where am I in this? Where's my body at? Where's my mind at? Why can't I let this anger go? Why am I mounting a defense?
Right.
Why can't I let this go? What is underneath there? That sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Toyota has this practice called the 5 whys, where they just ask if something goes wrong. Let's say there's a recall that costs the company, I don't know, $350 million. That you have to go 5 whys to get to the real root of it. And, it's like, well, this whatever piece of material was faulty from this vendor. Well, why was it faulty? And why did we use that vendor?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, we used it because it was this cost cutting. Okay, well, why? Why? You ask it five layers deep, and you get to the real reason being the expectation setting we made in 2016. That was 30% over our capacity. Set up this house of cards for us, and then it allows you ask those 5 whys, and it almost invariably brings you back to where you can take responsibility.
Yeah.
Of, oh, we did this.
Yep.
It wasn't this vendor that was that just messed up on their part. It's like, oh, we caused this.
Yeah. These are the things that my wife and I talk about a lot. It's like, how do we contribute? How did we contribute to whatever happened in our marriage or whatever incident that we're arguing through that day, or wrestling through or whatever, like it's not just that thing. It's like, how do we contribute? How do we show up to that thing? I think that is a very human, our responsibility is so important. Owning and taking responsibility. I feel like, sometimes most of human reactions is defensiveness, right? The first thing is I didn't do it. It's like as old as the beginning of the Bible. Like
right.
I didn't, the woman that you gave me, I didn't ask for this woman, or, like whatever, where'd the snake come from? That sort of thing, Yeah. It's like that human reaction. I'm quoting the Bible, by the way, the beginning of Genesis. So if people don't know, that is like a thing. And then I think part of the way that we live into what God is getting us to do always is like understanding our contribution and responsibility, that we are responsible beings that can be responsible, and like owning what we've done and then being a part of making it right.
Yeah, there's an adage in any scenario, there's 200% responsibility to go around. And our idea is that it's 100%. And how can you take, even if it's 90%, then you can create a story of how that 10% that was someone else's fault started a chain reaction. But if there's 200% to go around, it also ties into one of my other favorite books, 15 Commandments of Conscious Leadership. The first rule, this was also in Diana Chapman's episode, I think episode 13 or 14. The first rule is just take 100% responsibility. I mean, it literally could be a tornado knocks out a factory. How can you take 100? You can't learn anything by only externalizing scenarios. And yet, in almost every scenario, those 5 whys can be a path there, or just like you're saying, observing and asking that having that curiosity and commitment to seeing, okay, where did I contribute to this?
Yeah. And I think too, sometimes what gets in the way of us doing that is like, when we take responsibility, we feel like bad people. Like identity is a huge part of it. Like, well, if I take responsibility for that, that means I'm a bad person. And then detaching our identity from it is like really hard.
Right.
Like, yeah, I made that mistake. That doesn't make me a horrible person. That makes me human, and I can own my contribution, and it doesn't rock my identity.
Right. Well, and that's a power. That's a really powerful part of what you were saying of acknowledging your shadow is acknowledging that we are both good and bad, and it is or the tendencies are there, or whichever articulation just creates this place to be both, or the space to be both. Like it is, I think, one of the most formative things that one of the most powerful things that I try to do in this vein is literally sit there, think about how can I take 100% responsibility? How did I contribute to this? And part of that and going deeper to the roots is the shadow of recognizing I have some really dark parts of me.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, well, I wonder why we feel the need to package us up as either good or bad, or everyone else as good or bad, rather than the space for both.
Yeah.
But it is certainly, I think, for me, in my experience, really powerful to recognize, no matter how horrible, I mean, below the line, like 100% candor, I can create scenarios where I can put myself on the wrong side of history in the most awful, horrible places.
Mm-hmm.
I could create scenarios creatively in my mind in 30 seconds where I could be a Nazi.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's how crazy. And I would have never been able to articulate that in my head or let my imagination go there 5 years ago, 10 years ago. But I could walk you through the scenario where my desire to fit in leads me down a path of going to a meeting.
Mm-hmm.
My desire for pain avoidance leads me down a path of thinking about 95% of this ideology in one way and losing the other 5%. That's kind of crazy.
Mm-hmm.
My imaginative path could take me to where, there is this story that I could easily believe that they are encroaching other people. The other is not part of us, and they're encroaching on our livelihood. You can create a world, where it is like, okay, there is this meme that my whole community believes that there is scarcity, there isn't enough for everyone, and I've got to look out for my family,
Mm-hmm.
and I've got to look out for my extended family,
Mm-hmm.
my community that now my identity is wrapped up into. And this is pretty. This is about as dark as I've gone and the podcast, but that's part of integrating the shadow. Is go to the darkest places that you can go to, recognize, holy crap, I can go there.
Yeah.
And then zooming out and realizing, yeah, it is, if I'm capable of that, what other maliciousness am I capable of without without reflection
Yeah.
and contemplation on
Yeah. I think of
what's happening.
being a Christian minister. I think that Christianity has a lot of those resources, and not Christianity doesn't exclusively have these resources built into it, but I think Christianity has these resources built into it very well, where you could talk about, one, the fallenness of humanity, that every single person is a fallen being and is capable of very, very heinous sin. And at the same time, we are created in God's image and are so loved by God that that God Himself would come to redeem us with His own self, the God's self, right? Would come to redeem us. And I think you have both those. Like, I'm both deeply flawed and deeply loved at the same time. I believe that is a very important part of, like, seeing life rightly, that you're capable of, like what you said, like super heinous things. I was thinking about this recently, was quoting Martin Luther King's letter, a letter in Birmingham jail. And when he was in jail, 5 white pastors in Birmingham wrote an open letter to him in the paper saying, please leave. And it was very sensible, very respectable letter. Like, we'll handle this. We appeal to you as other pastors leave. And Martin Luther King, I mean, his letter is incredible. And he basically says, I'm really tired of the white community continuing to say, we will preach the gospel, but don't deal with the system of oppression that's there. And I share that story because
We won't even name the problem.
And I share that story because as I reflect on that, like I'm not white, but I can see myself in Birmingham in that time being Latino and being accepted in the white culture and not saying anything at all, just kind of going with it, going, yeah, let us handle it.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. King, let us handle it. I can see myself doing that. I don't want to be on that side of history, but I can see myself doing that. I can see, like, in my own heart, like, is there a place for that? Yeah. And is there a place for me to go, no, this is wrong, I'm going to call out the complicity here? Right. Yeah, both. I can see it both.
There's another book called The Courage to be Disliked that's come up on the podcast before. And the willingness to be misunderstood is one thing, but the courage, and that founders all need that, to where you're willing to be misunderstood. People don't understand why you're working on this really important thing, when almost by definition it doesn't seem that important to the rest of the world, but it does to you. But a whole nother level is the courage to be disliked, where it is, for many of us, at least for me, wired to fear abandonment means that I need constant feedback loops that I'm liked.
Yeah.
And that seems so innocuous. Like, courage to be, wanting to be liked. That is an equation for extremely malicious and, or at the worst or best case, ignorant behavior of like, well, the community says this is the right direction. And it requires so much courage to your scenario to say, you know what, I'm actually going to part ways with this other community of pastors, my livelihood, in many ways, and stand on this side of the equation.
Yeah, and I think it takes incredible integration for that to happen too, because what you're saying is that I could be my own person that has my own convictions and not have to go with and respectfully disagree with someone and say, I don't agree with you, and I still can love you and I still can serve you, but I don't agree with you. And if you don't like me, I'm okay with that. It takes a lot of integration. That's hard work to get to. It takes some time to get to, but that's what you're hoping for. You're hoping for like a buoyancy of character to go, I can take this if people don't like me, but I will stand on my convictions.
Well, it is so. For 32 years of my life, I probably would have said, you put me on any scenario in human history, and obviously I'd be on the right side. So rational.
Yeah.
Until I got to a point in life where I was like, what? That is so unlikely.
Yeah.
So unlikely. And to your point, how do I spend years cultivating the muscle to maybe when I'm 40, when I'm 45, I would have the courage to be on the right side? Because anyone that tells you like, oh yeah, back then I would have totally, in 1701, I would have totally been on the side of abolishing slavery. That is a white male, capable, liked, that has had 30 plus, once they're in a position to actually have a voice and a position of influence, the amount of training that and kind of formation to get to that place of influence. Talk about what got you here won't get you there. You almost have compromised every ability, every muscle that it would then require for you to switch 180 to actually have that position. I mean, it's just, again, this is obviously dicey topic, but anyone, or at least I would have at 29, at 24, at 16, it would have been so obvious. That's the side of history I would have been on. Yeah. But yeah, it's, so Juniper, 5 months old.
Yeah. I mean, just to tie that off, I would just say, I think it's really important to understand I think it's really important to choose a like a a coherent philosophy. You and I talk about philosophy. I've heard you talk about it on this podcast. A coherent philosophy. I think that's a really important thing, because if the goal, I don't know, this could be even controversial. I don't know if the goal is ever to be on the right side of history, because history's a strange thing. Like you never know like what history's going to do. We just don't know. I heard Aziz, I'm sorry, he has a Netflix special coming out. And I had a friend of mine go to his show. And he was telling me about it. He's like, his whole thing is on this topic. I think comes out in a couple of weeks. His whole thing is, and I'm just, this is secondhand, so I don't know. I haven't seen it. And he talks about how like, we just don't know what history is going to do. I think he uses an example of San Francisco homelessness. What if like homelessness is eradicated in 50 years and say 30 years or whatever. And because of all the street cameras that we have and everything, there's a footage of you passing a homeless person and that's giving him like a shrewd look, but because homelessness is completely eradicated, that is like the most inhumane thing in the entire world. And now you're on the wrong side. Because you just don't know. I think it was a really good, and I love comedians because we've talked about this. Yeah. They're able to deal with like prophetic stuff, like truth in a funny way, but like, oh, get you thinking like Chappelle does. I think I don't know if the goal is to be on the right side of history. I think the goal is to live by this is my goal, is to live by a coherent philosophy. And my philosophy is Jesus' philosophy, his way of life, his way of living.
How would you articulate that further?
I think his way of living is the best understood through the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 6, and 7. And I think the way that the things that he teaches us to practice there and how to live and how to see the world. And then if I zoom out through the Gospels, and then if I zoom out a little further through the epistles, and then if I zoom out a little further, like the canon, like the entire Bible. But
and what about the Sermon on the Mount? If listeners have never heard it, what about that as an ideal do you think is valuable to your life and obviously it's your life's work to others?
Well, I think it's in the way Jesus teaches about what is truly important on how the Sermon on the Mount starts with, "You have heard it said, but I say to you." Like there's some things that you've read in the law and you've interpreted in your law, and I've kind of tell you like the true way to live. And he uses a few examples like, you heard it said, do not murder. But I say like anger it's just the same thing. It's like the issue of your heart. And you've heard it say, don't commit adultery. It was actually about lust. And I actually want to rid you of this like lust for life that you go after, that causes you to objectify people and take something from them that you can never get back. So Jesus goes deeper into that. And then he tells us to build your entire life on his teachings, like his philosophy. Really, I think Christianity was first and foremost a philosophy, a way of living, way of seeing the world and way of living. At the end of the Sermon on the Mount, he says, he uses a parable. There's just two people that build a house, one built on the sand and one built on a rock. And then the storm happened, and the house that was built on the sand eroded and fell into the sea. But the one that stood on the rock survived the storm. He goes, if you take my words and put them into practice, you're like the person who built your life on a rock. I think he's given us a philosophy, like take his teachings and his way of life and build your entire life on it. So that's I think people need to find a coherent philosophy that you're going to build your life on. Picking and choosing different philosophies, ultimately you're the philosopher then. I think there's danger in that.
Yeah. Well, the Peter Thiel, it was obviously widely known, read, studied, listened to here in the Bay Area. One founder recently told me that he wanted to read his book 0 to 1 1,000 times, and And he wanted to do that over 10 years. One of the smartest thinkers in technology, entrepreneurship, investing in the world, hands down. And he is, I don't know if he would call himself a Christian, but I think he is, from the sense of he, when asked if he is a Christian, his answer is, well, I believe that we as humans have to pick ideals. And if we don't pick ideals, then they'll be chosen for us, or they'll be unconsciously chosen. And this is, he was an undergrad, I believe it was a philosophy major undergrad. And so out of all of his ideals, he chose Jesus. And this is not a pro Christianity episode or podcast. It is what it is. And this brings up a great thought that you're talking about of choosing your life's philosophy. He chose, instead of a life's philosophy, he just chose an individual that he felt like had the highest ideal of philosophy. And this individual would go on to describe Jesus as this individual who, as an ideal, as a capital M myth, is God choosing to come down, be man, go through the most painful, horrific way to die. Like, it's, we all hear this cartoon version of Christianity so much that we forget the story. And it is living penniless but virtuous, being completely just abandoned by his closest followers, or at least one of his closest followers, going through incredible embarrassment, ridicule, torture, like the most pain. Like, you couldn't outline, at least in Peter Thiel's articulation, you could not outline a more horrific way to go. And yet he's doing it not even for him, and has a chance to escape, and decides to actually just go head on through it for, in the capital M mythologies, sense, for everybody else's redemption and salvation. Like, that is, it's one of the most profound ways I've heard it articulated by someone that would probably even question whether he'd call himself a Christian, but just said, I, at 22, had a chance to pick an ideal from any number of stories and chose that one. And it's a profound articulation of why it is helpful to choose something other than yourself.
I think it's two things I'd say. Getting back to the right side of history thing, like choosing a philosophy to commit to, and then I'd also say, as a pastor, why I love we make the Jesus philosophy very complex, right? Very, very complex. Where I think the practice of it, even the Sermon on the Mount, boils down to like three things that Jesus assumes that we will do in practicing his way: is when you fast, when you pray, and when you give alms to the poor. Those are three things like he just assumes that you're going to do. In a Sermon on the Mount, like, he boils it down. I remember asking one of the most, probably the biggest, most prominent New Testament scholar in the world alive right now. And he's a fellow Enneagram 7 as well.
What's his name?
His name is N.T. Wright. His name is not N.T. His name is Tom Wright, but he writes under N.T. Wright. And we were hanging out and having a meal in San Francisco, walking around. I'm like, if you were to boil down Christianity to like three things, what would it be? And he's like, he basically boiled it down to these three things that Jesus did. Like, he said prayer.
And what about prayer? Just a more color on each one.
Prayer would be like a connectivity to God, a practiced connectivity to God, practicing something that's real. Because in the way of Jesus at the end of John 15, 16, 17 talks about how he's come to make us one with God. That's why he's there. Prayer is the way that we practice oneness with God. Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount gives a model prayer, the Lord's Prayer, that's pretty popular, right? Father in heaven, hallowed be thy name. That's the Lord's Prayer, practicing oneness.
And by the way, people can read the Sermon on the Mount in 3 minutes.
Yeah. Like it's 7 minutes. Yeah,
Okay.
5
a few minutes.
A few minutes. Yeah, not long.
And you can get more from that sermon than the average person in Israel and Jerusalem back then, because you can read the whole thing.
Yeah.
It's not what I love that you're touching on, is that it is so often complicated and convoluted into there's 800 pages of the Bible you need to read. But there's obviously 5,000 people heard the Sermon on the Mount with absolutely no other context other than what they were hearing.
And they knew what was, yeah. And then fasting, that is just one of the ways that we, again, getting back to the whole, our stomach ailments and the things that we like, it's a way that we connect our spirituality to our body. So fasting is a way where we are able to live into the discipline of prayer with our bodies. Fasting food teaches us how to keep our bodies in submission to our spirit, because oftentimes they're not integrated. We kind of like go after our cravings far too often. Right. It just teaches us to embody a spirituality.
How do you fast? By the way, you were mentioning that you
I do
fast.
Right now it's I like a weekly fast from dinner to dinner. It's not an intense fast at all, but it's a weekly one where I'm trying to, in my body, just remember that I actually could live my body can live under submission to my will, not the other way around.
What times or what day do you do that?
Wednesdays, typically.
So Wednesday till Thursday dinner?
No, Tuesday to Wednesday. Tuesday dinner. So yeah.
Okay.
So
that's fasting.
Fasting. And then giving to the poor. I think this is so big in San Francisco. I know people listen to this probably from all over the place, but San Francisco has a huge homeless problem. And I think homelessness in San Francisco, one of the questions that you said you want to ask, like, what do you think about when you're just like musing? I've been thinking about the homeless a lot. And San Francisco has more mental capital and more money than almost any other place on earth, like concentrated
in the history of the earth.
History, and we can't even touch it. It's actually growing. We can't touch homelessness. We can't figure out how to do it, and I believe that the poor are a prophetic witness that your human capacity has limits, and I think we should solve homelessness for sure, and I think we should first and foremost remember the poor, meaning you can't solve everything. San Francisco, you're smart, but you're not God. You can't solve it all, but you can remember them. You can give them dignity by looking them in the eye when you don't have any cash on you. Say, I'm sorry, I don't have any cash. Or like my wife and I, we try to build in our rhythms to remember the poor.
Yeah, I remember you saying it in one of your sermons recently. Well, what do you have a ritual of some sort on Saturdays, or I think maybe?
Yeah, it kind of ebbs and flows. This when we Sabbath on Saturdays, we turn our phones off, walk long, kind of like take long, slow walks, and do other things. But one of the things we do is we're really intentional about when we're walking to build in time to spend time with the poor. So if there are people that are, either panhandling or asking for something, we'll just always make sure that we spend time, and we take a certain amount of money out every month to keep in our wallets, just to give away if anyone asks, sort of thing. And we make sure that we're making eye contact. We ask them how they're doing, their name, and if it turns into like, is there anything we can do for you? Slice of pizza, lemonade, meal, something, anything. sometimes I'll say, do you have like a few bucks? Like, sure, we have a few bucks. Some people ask for meals, some people ask for lemonade, whatever. Right. So we'll just get to know them, pray for them.
I know with something that I talk quite a bit about, actually, ironically, not so much on this podcast, but outside the podcast, is mental health awareness and mental illness awareness. And the research shows that just listening, so 1 out of 5 people will deal with mental illness experience this year, and basically every year, and depression and anxiety being the 2 most common forms. So that's 1 out of 5 people. It's extremely common.
Wow.
And one of the hardest parts about going through a mental illness experience is the isolating feeling of feeling like you are alone. You can't talk about it. And one of the most profound things that you can do if you're one of the 4 other people, whether it's a family member, friend, loved one, spouse, one of the biggest things that you can do, the research shows, just listening to them, acknowledging it openly, that it is a very common experience, destigmatizing the ability to talk about it, can decrease the symptoms up to 50%.
Yeah. So true.
You don't have to have a solution. You don't have to fix. Like your solution is just listening.
Yeah. And I think that is so important. I feel like sometimes
anyone can do it. It's not going to solve it, 100%, but you have in your power at any moment in any day, anyone. You don't have to be a doctor. You don't have to read a book. It's just listening.
Yeah. Listening, eye contact, dignity. I see you. Is there anything I can do? That sort of thing.
Mm.
I think we just have this burden of like, I have to solve it all the time. If I can't solve it, it gets overwhelming to me. So
that's interesting. Yeah, you had the phrase of remember.
Yeah, remember. That's Jesus says,
poor.
Give alms, and in the New Testament over and over again, remember the poor, remember the poor. And then we do once a month, we set aside a day to.
It sounds like we have
to do that.
San Francisco has so many
opportunities to remember the poor.
Opportunities, but also so many Christ-like followers, at least from those 3 examples of people that meditate and contemplate. Aristotle has a quote of the goal of action is contemplation.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, Aristotle would think through, all of the animals have purpose. What is a human's purpose?
Yeah.
And if you're at the top of the food chain, your purpose can't just be to consume. What is the purpose? And it's contemplation. Mm. And you have just this craze. And
do you think he meant by that, like in everything you do, be intentional and contemplative in everything you do, or to actually sit and meditate, or both?
I imagine it would be both. Meditation in general, and I mentioned this on the podcast every once in a while as well, that it's a term as broad as the term sports.
Mm-hmm.
Like meditation is not this specific thing of like sitting down, lotus style, repeating a mantra. That is a version, but and I'm sure you know this well, but it is just it is as broad of a term as contemplation. And so I think any and all styles can be beneficial, but I think what he's saying is that the goal of life, at least what is counterintuitive, is not the right action. It is acting, then contemplating.
Yeah.
And that contemplation is the guide towards kind of chicken and egg. What comes first? Well, the contemplation probably comes first towards right action, which is a Buddhist concept, rather than the right action first and then contemplation afterwards. So where's the source of right action, of the selection of actions in the right direction?
Yeah.
The source is probably contemplation.
The
source of that is probably the wrong action or a bunch of action, and then contemplatively thinking, well, what should I do next?
Maybe it might have been you and I talking about this. I was talking about this with someone, like the first step in changing your behavior is not to change your behavior, but doing your behavior with mindfulness. So you're consciously doing your behavior. So if it's like, I'll use a pretty extreme example. Like if someone's addicted to pornography, the idea is like, stop doing pornography or stop using pornography. It's like, do it mindfully on what you're doing, consciously. Right. And that's actually how you start to change to change your behavior. If you're like, I can't stop drinking and getting blackout drunk, whatever it is, do it mindfully first. Don't just change your behavior. Like what?
Right.
I think that's what you're kind of getting at.
We haven't chatted about it, but yeah, I've heard it said a slightly different way that the best way to kick addiction is to write down a date that you want to quit by.
Mm-hmm.
And it is okay if it takes you 14 times in 5 years of getting that date wrong. But just by putting down that date, I think it triggers exactly what you're saying, this contemplation of, okay,
what am I doing?
I want to quit smoking by the 27th, and it's the 15th.
Yeah, most people do this stuff. You tend to do it mindlessly, just a habit. You fall into it.
Yeah.
But doing it mindfully. Maybe that's what you said. Aristotle said that?
Yeah. The goal of action is contemplation. And and a number of other great thinkers have said it similarly or with slight tweaks. But I think what is interesting about the outline that you're giving, well, two things that come to mind. One is the outline of the Sermon on the Mount. And by the way, I don't know if I label myself as Christian, by the way. And I don't think that's a good or a bad thing. I look at the way that we package things up, and it's really for the audience or the other person to package, buy, sell, transact, and I just don't want to be bought, sold, transacted, and so I don't know if I use that. I don't have a strong proclivity to not use that label, but I attend your services with my family every Sunday, and really find so much value in them, and but the thing that you're kind of walking through with the Sermon on the Mount that's really interesting is, and words are so clumsy, but you can do a little bit of interesting observation in saying, okay, there's prayer and union with God. There is fasting and mind over body. Or in Vedanta, the philosophy that is the source behind Hinduism, and then Hinduism being the source behind Buddhism. In Vedanta, it would just be the intellect over the body. And it's so similar, just fasting being a practical repetition of mind or intellect over body. And then third, alms, remembering the poor. And those three things in this just new wave of self-help is like meditation, intermittent fasting, and then remembering the poor would just be compassion, or it's a generosity or social entrepreneurship, or having a mission behind your company.
Mm-hmm.
Like there are all of these things that are just different articulations that are so Silicon Valley is replete with these articulations, but they'll never go to a source of like the Sermon on the Mount.
Mm-hmm. I think I find all that stuff, and that I have found this stuff ministering in the Bay Area so fascinating. San Francisco is such a spiritual place, and I've found that to be a very hospitable place for the gospel, like the gospel of Jesus, and the church that we started. Because I think that when I start to connect those dots, like I would do it the opposite way that you just did that. I'm a minister, I'm a pastor, that's what I do. Like I'd say, how you do, mindfulness, and how you do meditation, and how you're doing intermittent fasting, and how you're doing like mission. What you're really after, like the longing, the thing under the thing, is is what Jesus taught here, like how to stay connected with God. Mm-hmm. Like you have this deeper longing than that thing, and maybe that might not be satisfying you the way that you think it is. Like you have this deeper,
right?
You have a deeper longing to know Jesus. Like I would do that. My minister thing would do that. So I would point out the thing that you're doing, and I'm like, there's something underneath that,
right?
That even that, it's not as satisfying. I would say,
right.
Are you? And then I would go there.
Well, and that might be your pastoring thing.
That's my pastoring thing.
My podcasting thing is to take what you said and then to go even deeper into, we're very much, we're wired very similarly, by the way, for listeners. Would be to go even deeper than but I think the other thing that was going through my mind, that's quite simpatico with what you're saying right there is, so there's this reflection or a carbon copy. To be honest, I'd say like so many of, especially Eastern religion, is so much of it is just psychotherapy.
Mm-hmm.
So much of religious adherence is psychotherapy. And psycho, the Greek term psyche, as actually, it's not mind, it's soul.
Mm-hmm.
So psychology is the study of the soul, not the study of the mind. And it is this, and it is, below the line kind of, in a below the line kind of way. It's like people are so comfortable going like 10 meters deep. And it's like, hey, if you want to be really productive, be mindful. Or, intermittent fasting. It's so good for body, puts your body into hormesis and uses all these, biological terms, like 10 meters deep. We are all good. But even deeper below that, it's, well, why do you want to be productive? What is that longing that is within you that wants you to be productive? Or giving alms to the poor, said, maybe another way is being useful in your community. Where is, and you see obvious need for use. You have the ability to walk, talk, generate wealth, and there are people without it. That is such an obvious place where you can be useful. And it's a reminder each day that, you know what, I could be more useful in my community. There are people that need more use of me. And it's like, go 10 meters, 30 meters, 50 meters, 150 meters, 1,000 meters deep. And so much of religions or mythology in the capital M sense is tying to that psychotherapy or that soul therapy that is your longing for something really deep here. And you're so comfortable talking about it in terms of like the 10-meter deep, like you want to be productive, or it's about energy management or stress management. It's like go 1,000 meters deep into your soul or your spirit. And why are you longing for this? How can you serve that even better? And I think it's talking about so many of the things we touched on, integrating the shadow or acknowledging what's really there, and psychotherapy being, therapy for the soul or psychology. It's not just like behavioral psychology. It's like, well, what is driving this behavior? That is something really deep down that isn't just your mind or your brain or your, neurological pathways. Maybe there's something really deep down to why. I mean, we can talk about these things as productivity, but it's like the topsoil built on 3, 4, 5,000 years of mythology, especially in the West, 2,000 years of a Christian mythology of these things that that get at what can be a pretty dang coherent philosophy. And just to tie a bow on that is, Peter Thiel says his ideal is this guy 2,000 years ago, Jesus. And so much of the Valley or entrepreneurship is choosing this guy, saying, I want to read that book 1,000 times. Why not listen to that guy? Go straight to the source, at least for him, which is an ideal that is probably more coherent than his own philosophy. And I think just to round it out, you also mentioned, if you don't have that coherent philosophy to live by, then you have to be the philosopher.
Yeah.
And that's a tough. Do you mind articulating a little bit? Well, you can talk about anything that soliloquy just opened up in your mind, but do you mind elaborating a little bit on that alternative that you speak to of you have to be the philosopher if you don't borrow someone else's?
Yeah, I mean, just you brought up, suke and the soul, where we get the word psychology and psycho. And I think really ties into, something Jesus said, that if you want to save your life, and the word he uses is psyche, suke in Greek, the same word, right? If you want to save your soul, you have to lose it. If you want to find it, you have to lose it. And I think getting back to what Teal is saying, I think here's someone who's reached the top of the top. And if we, you can take someone's kind of formula and try to do their thing, and that can work for a little while, but then there's this deeper thing. I think you're touching on the longing. There's some deeper thing there. And I think what the philosophy of Jesus, the way of life, the Jesus way does is that it teaches us all these other ways of doing it really are about turn to be about us. But the starting point of Jesus' philosophy is deny yourself, and then you find yourself. Give yourself up, and then you find it. Lose it, and you find it. And then it doesn't become about you. He doesn't want us to lose our life. He wants us to save our lives, but the way we do it is this upside down counterintuitive thing. So I think that's maybe that's what Teal's getting at. Maybe that he's I've done also other stuff, and I realize that at the end it turns to be about me. But what is so attractive about Jesus, it wasn't about him. It was truly about the redemption of others. And I'll follow that, that sort of thing. And to answer your question, when I become the philosopher, when I pick and choose, not that I don't read broadly, I try to read pretty broadly, but why I've landed on Jesus as the coherent philosophy that I'm following and giving my life to as a pastor. And I say coherent philosophy only because, that's probably the most accessible way of saying it to the audience that we're talking to right now. I think Jesus is talking about a way of life. And the reason why, two reasons. One, I really believe that Jesus showed up to me when I was 15 years old and made himself known to me. So I can't deny that. But the other reason is over and over again, I come to if I'm following my own sort of philosophy, or I'm reading this person, that person, this person, I'll take a little bit of this and I'll mash together my own sort of philosophy. It's not coherent. I realize that I actually become the person that I'm trying to save myself with just picking and choosing what I want to believe. And I tend to just, everything lines up to what I want, And I found that following Jesus, a lot of it just rubs against a lot of things I would want to naturally believe. And it's a coherent philosophy that I find to be the best way to show up in the world, true humanity. I think Jesus makes us true humans, real humans.
It makes me want to ask a question around why do you feel like it is? So in many ways, it is like the intellectual's delight because it is so topsy-turvy, deep, counterintuitive. I mean, when you get past the cartoonish version, it is this very interesting, very interesting metaphysical narrative. Why do you feel like it's so hard, especially in a city like San Francisco, that is so spiritual? Why do you feel like it's anathema to, when I tweet out your lectures, I lose followers. Sermons, I lose followers. Not that I really care, but I find it interesting. Mm-hmm. I remember tweeting out a point that you talked about listening, and then I gave you a shout out, and the likes from just the thread around listening, how to be better listeners, how I think my biggest mistakes in life have come from not listening. Mm-hmm. And tweet out this thread that just people really love. And I tweet out, shout out to you, or in the thread, and it's just lost followers. And or people deselected. They're Why do you think it's such a struggle for a city that is so spiritual to be open to something like Christianity?
I think Christianity, still at its core, is fairly exclusive. And I don't think people like that. It's not, it's open to everyone, but Jesus says there's this one way. I think that really, people opt out at that point. I mean, I think they take the Jesus as an amazing teacher, Jesus as a really good option for a philosophy of life, taking a lot from what he said. It's a good model. But then, you read the stuff that he said about him being the only way. You read the stuff about how Jesus calls us to deny ourselves and lose ourselves, take up your cross, he says, and follow him. I think that's when people just opt out, deselect, like that Christianity at that point becomes not something that people really want to give themselves to. That's probably the nice way of saying it. Probably the not nice way of looking at it is there's been so much horrific stuff done in the name of Jesus that people are like, I don't subscribe to that at all.
I don't want to align with that.
I'm not aligning with that. I mean, horrific stuff. And it's in our history. Like the church of Jesus has been complicit in horrific things, both Protestant and Catholic. So, and Orthodox. So I mean, at that point, I can understand. I understand that. Like, I'm not subscribing to that. That's a really cool thing. If it was a TED Talk, but the fact that it's a sermon, I'm out, that sort of thing. Like, okay. Yeah.
Interesting. That's a interesting articulation. Because if it was a TED Talk.
Because TED Talks don't have to. What I like about, again, this is probably getting way more Jesus-y than you probably thought, but what I love about he's a really, like, you have to make a decision. I listen to TED Talk, I don't have to make a decision. I'm like, oh, that was cool. But you like take the teachings of Jesus serious enough that you have to like either reject them or accept them. Like, that's usually two options.
Yeah.
So
the two thinkers that I'd love to bring up and just get your thoughts, that this is just part of my own curiosity and conversations with you, would be, one is, so Nietzsche has this quote of, there was one Christian and we killed him. And he's in many ways the father of psychology. And he thought so much about Christianity. And he's a psychologist before the term psychologist existed, and thought so much about the Western civilization orientation with Christianity, and he's seen as I think the above the line version is seen as anti-Christian, but he actually was quite fearful of a society that would get rid of its foundational framework that was built around Christianity. What comes to mind when you hear that quote of there's one Christian and we killed him? And what do you think the mentality would be for someone to articulate that? Because I also think so many people look at Christians and think something similar of like, these people, and just lump them together to what you were just saying. I don't want to align with quote unquote these people.
Mm-hmm. Explain. Yeah, I'm familiar with that quote. Explain.
I guess
because isn't the rest of the quote God is dead, and the rest of the quote is and we killed him.
Yeah, that's it's actually separate.
A separate quote, but it's the same
observation. But same idea of just there is Christ the figure, and then there is this group, Christianity, and I think the reason I bring it up is it somewhat builds on what you're saying of not wanting to align with the horrific things that have happened within this whatever term you want to call it, religion, group, ideology. That you can find ways for each one to stick, but I think if you zoom out, it's also just, I don't want to align with that group. This idea in my head of that group.
I have a lot of empathy for people that have thought deeply about Christianity and has outright rejected it because of, quote, Jesus's people or the church or Christianity as a organized sort of religion. I think that's really hard. That's like, I think part of just like integrating the shadow side, we have to do that with Christianity as well. We have to integrate that. I have to integrate being a Christian. I have to integrate the horrific things that the church has done with complicity to racism in America, complicity with empire, and the Inquisitions. I have to integrate the dark side, the dark underbelly, and be honest with it, look at it straight in the face and say, that's a really horrific, heinous thing. And I can understand how you would throw out Christianity because of that. And at the same time, I think that Jesus, the way of Jesus most aligns to reality. The teachings of Jesus most align to reality, ultimate reality. And so I'm going to, like, in our point in human life and human history, we'll try to align my life and practice to the teachings of Jesus as I try to integrate and lament and mourn and repent of all this other stuff that we've done as well. But I understand, like, I know that people will hate church, especially in America today, like, especially people that live on the coasts, like, just don't like, I call it churchianity, or not, it's been called churchianity, like the Christian nationalistic American church. And I understand that.
What would you say is that with what you've built with reality overlaps with that churchianity, and what departs from that for the church that you and Ash have built?
We've tried to build our church on authenticity and like a hope of like just taking the teachings of Jesus and saying, these are them. Let's try to do them together by the power of the Spirit. Like, and it hasn't been like when we started the church, getting back to founding something, we didn't try to do gimmicks or advertising, or like, we really try to make it as authentic as to ourselves as we are. So we weren't feeling like we were acting at all. And we tried to give people an authentic experience with God's Spirit, an authentic experience of the teachings of Jesus, to the best that we can, and then get out of the way and not try to mess with putting on a show or a concert or that sort of stuff. So we try to build it around authenticity. So the thing that we kind of try to leave is this like showy, like glossy, sexy sort of like thing that the church has become, and pretense and all this stuff that we kind of, you can smell. I will love about San Francisco, it smells pretense like a mile away. It really does value authenticity. And so I just found ourselves, Ash and I found ourselves home here because we were able just to be ourselves and go, this is the church, this is who we are, this is the teaching of Jesus, and we hope you follow them, that sort of thing. So we try to keep it that simple. Yeah.
Well, and for listeners, you also leverage technology quite well living in San Francisco. Great podcasts that people can listen to that are your sermons. But if it makes you feel better, you can call them lectures on things from everything. And what I love about it is it will touch on things from friendship to it'll touch on listening to race. Really, really powerful topics that aren't just kind of hitting the same thing over and over again, but taking this coherent philosophy, applying it to these places in really thoughtful ways that apply. That's what I love about going to reality. It is a great contemplative, it's about 2 hours or an hour and a half, but contemplative time in the week to just go way outside of tech and blogs on productivity and podcasts and TED Talks and Q&As and Twitter that are really just really staying not even 10 meters deep, really for the most part staying about 5 meters above, maybe dipping 2, 3, 4 meters below. But it is such a to your point, a philosophical contemplation, and amongst within so many different topics that just I grew up Catholic, never heard the tenets of Christianity applied to such practical things that I think you really know your audience of the skeptical, intellectual, 20, 30 something Christian in San Francisco. The other thing that came to mind. Oh, and we can pause for a second. Do you need to stretch your legs or anything?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Is there any topic that you want me to make sure to rope in that you would find interesting?
Yeah, I mean, you can steer this conversation where you want to. If it's getting too
I this is my favorite episode
churchy.
I've done.
Okay.
No,
It's all up to you.
You can take it wherever you want.
No, I'm not saying the same thing. You can take it wherever you want.
Well,
and how long do you want these things to go?
2 hours.
Really?
Oh yeah.
Long form.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Oh dude,
that's awesome.
It doesn't cost anything. Once people start listening, I've actually heard from listeners that they like that they can just put it on the background and not have to hit play or find another episode.
Oh wow. Yeah.
So they'll listen to it over the course of 2-3 days.
Yeah.
And not have to keep finding episodes. So yeah, Johnny, you can take all this stuff out, but
or not.
Yeah, or not. You can leave this stuff in. Actually, Johnny, feel free to leave all of that in. No, let's leave it in. The below the line version.
Below the line.
Exactly. So the other thought that comes to mind is are you familiar? I'm sure you're familiar with Joseph Campbell.
No.
Hero's Journey and Hero of a Thousand Faces.
Yes.
And kind of social commentator in the 20th century. I don't think he was particularly spiritual or he was spiritual. I don't think particularly Christian, but he had this idea similar to Nietzsche's views and kind of fear for a world that would lose its framework or coherent philosophy, that for all of its horrific downsides provided a very helpful framework in Nietzsche's mind. Joseph Campbell, in the same way, said that it's irreversible. And we have crossed the threshold, and now we're free. He called it free falling into the future. Mm. We've lost our mooring, and maybe for good reason. He actually just does not take a position one way or the other, but quite literally describes it, free falling into the future. San Francisco is a city that in many ways is described as kind of living in the future, getting apps and self-driving cars and things like that, a few years ahead of other cities in the U.S. and around the world. And does that phrase "free falling into the future" is that part of what you mean by when you're your own philosopher and you have to pick and choose that it in some way is a pretty at least I guess in your mind a really risky endeavor?
Yeah, I think that's a really good observation that you bring up from both of those thinkers, because, and this is kind of how this is my like way of thinking. If I'm the person that is always shifting and changing, and there's nothing to anchor me, I am literally free floating into my own sort of like whatever I like, whatever sounds good to me. And I just don't know how that I don't think that leads into anywhere good. I mean, personally, I don't. I know people have done a lot of really horrible things in the name of religion. I think it's because it's a really horrible way of looking at the way they have interpreted the way of Jesus. So when you get back to like the teachings of Jesus and the way of Jesus, I think those things are really, really important and coherent. And I think San Francisco is the future. And what I like about ministering in San Francisco is that it's so far in the future that ancient practices are attractive again, right? Like the idea of a Sabbath. When I talk about a Sabbath with people, they're like, I want that. You mean you get a day of rest? That sounds amazing. And it's a ritual.
Dude, I'm a walking San Francisco cliche because I have on my calendar Saturdays, no screen Saturdays.
Yeah. Which is a Sabbath.
Right.
Like you're literally saying a Sabbath.
Do you mind describing for listeners what you mean by Sabbath? And I know
Yeah.
you touched on it a little bit with you and Ash.
Yeah. So a Sabbath is a 24-hour day of rest, like a literal day of rest where you're delighting. We start our Sabbath with a meal and an ancient Jewish blessing that the woman of the house always does, where she lights candles and says a Hebraic prayer, and then over the house and over our table. And then I just turn to everyone in the house and just say Shabbat Shalom to everyone, to whoever's at our house for dinner or just our family. Shabbat Shalom to Ashley, Shabbat Shalom to Juniper, Shabbat Shalom to Prince, the golden doodle, and Shabbat Shalom to Dave. And then
You say it to yourself?
Yeah. And we just, Shabbat Shalom is like to bring in the God's peace. Like we just want to just rest. Where it feels like this is how I try to practice knowing that it's the same reason why I go to sleep every night. I'm practicing with my body that I'm not God. I don't control everything. I need to rest. I need to let my mind rest. I need to let my body rest. This isn't just good for me physically, it's good for me spiritually, like a whole person. And we sleep in, and then we have Ash and I will read. Typically I'll try to read poetry on my Sabbath and read a lot of the Psalms and then get myself into a good novel. And then we go for a really long walk. And we practice like Eucharisto, which is like gratitude. We go through our week and just like, what are we thankful for? And then we recite that. And then we try to walk slow and mindfully, kind of like we said, like I said previously. So we do this every week, build this rhythm in to where I don't show up as like someone who is producing anything. I'm showing up as someone who's just like receiving from God, like the goodness of his world, his creation, resting. That's usually, we do that every week. And so to talk about the future, San Francisco, I think it's so far ahead that we realize even as far ahead as we are, we still can't solve everything. I think San Francisco's on the front line of like, we actually can't solve it all, even though we want to. And then we try to hack the mind. We try to hack everything. There's limits. And so when you invite people to embrace their limits and live under Sabbath, live under intermittent fasting, live under meditation, all these are ancient practices that San Franciscans eat up. Like, yes, I want that.
I remember you had a quote 2 or 3 years ago that was that you brought up, that I can't remember who said it, but it was in one of your sermons where you said San Francisco is, the quote goes, San Francisco is the most un-American city where America gets made.
Yeah. Yeah, that's Rebecca Solnit. She wrote a San Francisco Atlas. That's in her intro. Yeah, San Francisco is the left coast, left part of the left coast, the most un-American city where America invents itself. Yeah,
invents itself.
Yeah,
and yeah. So
that's
in this time of 2019 that we're finding ourselves in, I think you're touching on something pretty significant that is happening. That we're kind of in the boiling water. We forget that it's happening. But if you look around, just all of these ancient practices, like we're just like, the thought comes to mind of just like piecemealing, like rescuing this from 3,000 years ago, this from 1,500 years ago, this from 2,000 years ago. And it is the city almost by definition last decade. And it has had many kind of common threads around this in some senses, but really, last decade was, let's move beyond, let's leave the rest of the world behind. So much of tech is anything that's 18 months or older is obsolete.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I think it's an interesting observation that the biggest trends that are happening right now are things like no screen Saturdays.
So true.
Or work from home Wednesdays.
Yeah.
Or really adhering to no devices after 8.
Yeah.
Or meditation.
Yeah.
Or
and I
fasting.
think everyone in the Valley knows how bad that stuff is for you. We all know it is. We all know to keep our kids off it until a certain age, limit screen time. We know what it does to the brain. I mean, the research is out. It's not any huge secret. And I think integrating tech, I think that tech with a conscience is actually having to ask themselves questions. What are we doing to the human brain, the human body? And then how do we help people build in rhythms of discipline because they won't do it themselves? I think it's the same thing that, when you watch documentaries on the food industry, all this stuff that you wish that the food industry would have done, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, to regulate some of the ways that it was habituating people towards obesity. You wish that they would have put in these things. I think tech now is faced with the same sort of stuff. Like in 30 years from now, when there's a documentary made about tech, do you want to be the people that self-regulate to go, we know what this is doing.
Mm-hmm.
And we're putting in safeguards to make sure that we're not pushing like tech obesity or whatever, that whatever form of like, we're so addicted to our phones or our tech now that we can't be human. Like I think there's a stream of conscious tech that's thinking about this now. Like we don't want to be, speaking of, again, bringing up wrong side of history, we don't want to be what we fight with, whether it's food industry or alcohol industry, whatever industry that just gets Americans addicted to their thing,
mm-hmm.
even though no matter how unhealthy we know that we're making people cigarettes, all that stuff. Tech is the same sort. The power is there. And it's just asking the questions like, what are we doing to people and how do we build in?
Totally talking about being on the wrong side and I love the point that you made about history is not linear. It's pretty expansive, but there are points in time when you can look back and say, wow, okay, there were people in this vocal minority that were in the right side
mm-hmm.
that helped correct the path. But
when you consciously know what you're doing and you do it anyways, that's that's pretty heinous. That's like when we know what this does, right. But we know what crack cocaine does, but we're still going to sell it to you.
Well, it's right in line with what I was going to say is it is just to articulate how easy it is to be on the wrong side. You look around your livelihood, your community, the phrases that people use, and the value placed on those things, like if the value system is building $1 billion company as fast as possible.
Yeah.
And the language used is engagement. Build engagement with your application.
Yeah.
Number of users,
yeah.
Customers,
clicks.
It's when you actually lift your head up, it's actually outrageous how much we are talking about addiction.
Yeah, that's what we're talking about. Get someone addicted to your product,
right?
To your app, whatever.
Right, and it is not something that is affecting their lungs. So you're not getting clobbered by the media in that regard, but you are literally, and I know this from friends that I know, love, brilliant, compassionate, smart, soul-filled people that still will go to work at a place where all day they're using words like engagement, retention, minutes on the application.
Mm-hmm.
And it's abstracted away from words like addiction.
Yeah.
And how do you grow that addiction?
Yeah. I mean, bringing it back to Mad Men, you watch these Mad Men and they're saying, they're like, they're rationalization is almost the same as we use today. I would imagine that are in boardrooms and tech boardrooms, the same sort of rationalization. Like people could choose for themselves.
Mm.
You know, they can self-regulate. We don't have to regulate. They can. The same thing you're pushing cigarettes. Like, oh, they can choose for themselves if they want to smoke or not. Like,
Right.
no, let's not fund that research that shows that the addiction to this product is actually destroying their attention or their brain or their whatever. And I think that they're what I try to weave into people that are in tech at our church, and there's a lot. I don't know the percentage. I forget. I know we just did a survey and we had it. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but is to get people to think holistically about what we do. To be mindful consciousness, right? Towards like, what are you doing? What are you building? What is this adding to the world? That sort of thing. I think that's a really important piece. So, going back to like, how do we get here? Coherent philosophy?
That and free falling into the future, and what do you see as a pastor in a city that is quote unquote living in the future?
Yeah.
Well, I think it is a great thread around or thought around just it is so when you mention it, kind of does. It becomes pretty clear that there are pockets of San Francisco that are pulling out these 1,000-year-old. I hear Wendell barking in the background. This ancient wisdom, and hopefully that is to that quote where what was it? Where it's the most un-American city where America reinvents itself.
No, invents itself. Yeah.
Invents itself. So maybe that is what's happening in this shift.
Yeah, that's the hope. I mean, I've never been. I've never moved here. Well, let me rephrase this. I haven't lived in San Francisco with a sense of hopelessness at all. Like a lot of people, like you're trying to do church in San Francisco. Like, isn't that a pretty godless place? And I just find the inroads to the way of Jesus to be everywhere. And this is one of them. Like, like these ancient, if you get back to even Jesus's like prayer and fasting and giving alms, like I can't think of one person that I've met in San Francisco that would like disagree with those things.
Right.
It's like built into, I think we're backing into a lot of that stuff. Like we're realizing, the importance of prayer and meditation is super, super important. And the importance of integrating our mind and our body. It's like mindfulness to our body and what's going on with our body, making sure that our body doesn't rule us. Our appetites don't rule us, right? That our will is shaped by something bigger than our guttural appetites. Right. Paul the Apostle talks about like God being our belly, like making sure that God is in our belly. He doesn't mean like, he means just our appetites, like our guttural first initial response appetites aren't what's leading us. It's actually our values, our will is, and I think that's what fasting gets to. And to giving alms, which I think again, San Francisco, it's I see the homelessness in San Francisco as being a wonderful opportunity to remember our limitedness, how we're limited. We can't solve it all, but we can be involved at a very, very personal level. It's in front of us all the time, and we're able to do that.
Well, and I think it is something else that's happening in a complete parallel, largely disconnected world is for the last 150 years of just the field of psychology. It's been about the individual and the individual path and things like nature versus nurture. And it's actually in the last 10 years is starting to get completely blown up because something like the concept of epigenetics, where you can inherit trauma, just completely blows up the conventional psychoanalysis of your own nature versus nurture. It's actually this third complete realm of, well, maybe it was the nurture of 3 generations ago.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take but 30 seconds to realize, okay, that kind of destroys a lot of the foundations of this field of psychology.
Yeah.
And it's psychology is the reason this podcast talks about it so often is because I feel like it's the operating system of the world. And it is the operating system within each one of us in which we make our decisions. And what has been interesting about just observing the field from the spectator seat is just things like epigenetics, where it's inheriting trauma in your DNA, quite outrageous of a concept to any psychotherapist 50 years ago. That would have been outrageous. To now, the very beginning stages of thinking about collective psychology, that this idea that there is no just individual psychology. And that's what is interesting. And a very different, I don't know if even something like Enneagram would have ever been articulated this way, but it very much is kind of your 7 or 3 or 9 kind of personality. Well, Dave, thank you so much for taking time out of your afternoon to come on the podcast as a podcast built around creator psychology. I think there's something deep, profound that I'm still trying to chip away at around this narrative of Christianity that has spoken so clearly to me as a creator. Just the tenet of sacrifice, which in many ways is that is in the Western world such a Christian tenet, and going through sacrifice for the usefulness of those around you. Yeah, is such a strong tenet of my own entrepreneurship and creator psychology that I think is a thread that I plan on. I'm sure I'm going to be able to unpack a lot of this stuff and many conversations, hopefully with you over time. But I really appreciate you kicking it off today, and maybe we'll do a part 2 sometime soon.
Yeah, this is so fun. Thank you so much for the invite. It's been great.
Awesome, Dave. Thanks for joining.
Yeah.
Hey, friends and listeners, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you want to hear more of these types of conversations, go over to your favorite podcast app and hit subscribe, or leave us a review. Good or bad, we love hearing from people that appreciate this type of conversation and want more of it. You can also follow us on Twitter at @GoBelowTheLine, as well as see in our Twitter bio our email address for you to shoot us a note on any suggestions of guests or topics that we should cover. We read every single one, so thank you for those that have already sent those in. That's it for us today. We will see you next time on Below the Line.
Below the Line is brought to you by Straight Up Podcasts.